Thank you so much. I'm Steve Burrell. I'm Vice President for IT at Georgia Southern University. I've been in higher education for 34 years now. My mom's wondering, when I'm ever going to graduate and leave school. But a long time in higher ed, and Dr. Thomas is going to be here. She was my co-presenter, but she got called away on some other business. So we're gonna solo flight this one. I'm going to move through some slides pretty quickly, and then I want to try to encourage discussion because there's a lot of variability and a lot of ideas around this. I'm going to try to present some of the research literature and some of the stuff from a research base so we can kind of be grounded in some of these things. But creativity and a lot of creative thinking and application around how to recruit and retain our best people is certainly a conversation. I want to facilitate that. The research will reveal that there's about 4 principles or so that kind of come out of this literature. We're going to cover all 4. Don't worry about the speed I go. Don't try to take notes. All this has been uploaded to the Campus Technology site, so you can grab it later. Just relax and hang on for a few seconds. Principle 1, if you don't realize that human resources are your most valuable important asset, you're probably not here, right? That's why we're here, because our IT people really are our most useful and valuable asset, and the one that's constantly under attack. Welcome, come on in, we're just getting started, thanks. And in the higher education realm, we are exceedingly challenged. It's been difficult for a long time, and it kind of comes in waves based on the economy, but it's increasingly difficult to find, train, retain, and entertain our IT skills that are needed. We are constrained in higher education by the limited number of resources that we begin with. I was just talking to some of the folks here. Our institutions have grown so much, our resources are stretched over so much. We just don't have the resources that we used to in order to invest in people. Our policies are also very restrictive regarding what we can do, particularly those of us in public. How many in public institutions? Just a quick raise hand, right? And privates? Okay, all right. Those of us in the public realm, we're constrained by state laws and regulations which really tend to tie our hands. And then kind of the disposition that when we're all in a budget cutting mode or we're trying to stretch the resources, that training and investment in people and the staff from a retention standpoint is always like the first thing to go, right? We cut the travel budget, we cut the training budgets, and we're cutting out all the perks. And the things that people really identify with as being highly valuable in their jobs. Principle number 2, you have to realize that recruitment and retention are inextricably linked, right? If we're not bringing the right people with the right fit to our institution, then our hopes of retaining them in that environment are much less. So the research says that the recruitment of the right fit for IT staff is critical, and of course it's necessary to have people who retain on our staff in order to have that kind of high competition that many of us are feeling in the higher education realm today, particularly with shrinking pools of applicants and trying to market and recruit the best students. We have to put our best people in front of these things. So compensation is one of those things that some of the research says, look, compensation isn't everything, and I think that's probably true to a degree. But the reality is this: compensation is a market issue, right? If you're not able to compete in your market at a salary that's at least competitive or reasonable, you're going to have a very difficult time recruiting people to even look at your institution. The thing about it is that employees want to feel that the compensation schedules are fair. This goes back to antecedents of job satisfaction that are based on organizational fairness, procedural fairness, these types of things. So if we're not competitive, we've got some problems to begin with. We'll come back to that in a minute, and I'll be interested to hear some of your feedback. So we go back to this fit. An applicant's beliefs about the existence of good fit will subject to factors of needs, values, interests, personality, strong influence on their job choice and decisions. So getting the right fit. I just participated in a couple of weeks of seminars at Harvard University, and we were talking about the right fit for presidents in a university. 90% of presidents feel that if the institution isn't the right fit for them, their presidency is doomed, and the data actually kind of spells that out. The same thing's true deeper down into our organization, folks. If that fit isn't there, if we're not hiring the right people, if all we're doing is hiring resumes, right, we know how difficult that can be for them to be happy and for us to be happy and then to retain those individuals. So we want to focus on fitness. And how do we do that? The research literature says, tailoring the recruitment processes is the best we can to make sure that the actual information that we're putting out in our job ads actually has fit type phrases in it. Let's talk about the kinds of qualities we're looking for in individuals, not just the technical skill sets that we like. So we need people to work in a highly collaborative and team type environment, and that's truly what we are. Then we need to say that very clearly. Targeting those individuals which exhibit those values and goals any way that we can, either through recruitment process, but sometimes our selection committees, depending on what level we're working with, having a conversation about what does that fit mean? What does that fit feel like? Are we looking for people who are task orientated? Do we need people with leadership attributes? Are we needing people with people skills? What are some of those non-technical attributes about fit in terms of their, the dispositions of individuals? And also talking about our organizational values. I worked for a private school that had a Catholic affiliation. It adopted Benedictine values, and we always put those things out in front of people when we were hiring them because we wanted to make sure that there was a good fit. They didn't have to be Catholic, but they needed to identify with that value system because that's the way we were going to operate. Principle number 3, how many are CIOs in the room? How many want to be CIOs? Oh, put your hands down. You don't know what you're getting into, trust me. How many of you are actually hiring people? Let's go to that row. Okay, good. This statement is true. I mean, as CIOs, we need to be recognized as not just technical people, and the data that Wayne was just showing us in the last session showed how CIOs are perceived and need to be less technical. But as we go deeper into the organization, we get more technical and more technical and more specific and so on and so forth. Driving this concept down into your organization and adopting the fact that, look, again, I don't need to be technical here because I'm hiring a person, an individual. I need to be more focused as being a leader of people than perhaps a hire of technical skills. So what does the data say about why staff stay? Dr. Thomas finished her dissertation recently and did some case studies and some focus groups. And these are some of the things that came out. Compensation and benefits, clearly, we've talked about that. Herzberg back in the 50s says, if you want somebody, there's this hygiene factor associated with and extrinsic factors associated with attracting and retaining people. And if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, having enough money, having the funds, earning what you feel is fair and reasonable for you to raise and family or whatever it is your interests are extremely important. So, and increasingly benefits, and the cost there and associated with is very important to people. So we can't ignore that, right? I mean, there's just something that has to happen there at a fundamental level for people. However, once we get them in there, opportunities for promotion. In my research, different groups were interested in different kinds of promotion. The research I did with IT staff, men were very interested in learning new skills and taking on new and different kinds of tasks. Women respondents were very interested in taking on more responsibilities and moving up in the organization. So there's just a few ideas of, some real research behind some of this. Reward and recognition, an area of my expertise, very important, and we'll talk about that in a second. Training and development, again, when people's job satisfaction's on the line, giving them the right tools and the right training to do the job well is a high satisfaction issue. But we're in that quandary of, well, if I invest in somebody's training and they're going to get all these skills, then what do? Right? They offer themselves up and they take their work somewhere else. But what's the alternative to that? That we want people to be non-aspirational and uneducated in their jobs, so we have to be careful about falling into that trap. And creating work-family balance and having flexible schedules. So creating time off for people, creating those windows of opportunity, setting expectations appropriately can be tough in the IT realm, right? Of constant upgrades and dealing with increasingly complex issues. But these are the things that are important. For us in public education, from Georgia, it's very difficult for us to create flexible schedules for people. I mean, it just wasn't in the realm of concept for our HR department. So we've had to work with them over a period of time to come up with even work and home arrangements for some people were outside the bounds. But now, through a lot of negotiation and discussion, we've kind of got that taken care of. Job satisfaction and organizational support become the top two antecedents or the top two discussion topics when we talk about people staying close to home and staying in their job. We want to avoid work exhaustion. This is the technical research term for burnout. Job autonomy, that is, letting people do the job, not micromanaging. Role conflict, this is making sure that people understand what their job is. People get really frustrated when they don't know what their main responsibilities are, or they feel like they're being pulled in too many different directions. Some of our institutions by design are pretty small. We've got small staff. We need good IT athletes that can do a lot of different things. Just make sure that people understand that that's the job you're asking them to do when we bring them into the institution. Others get very specialized, but if they're concerned about that, that's another one. And career satisfaction, are we in the right business? I'm in higher education because I get to watch young people walk across that stage, every 6 months or so. And I know I'm changing and saving lives by the work that we do. And so I'm in the right career. And if we can attract people who share that kind of value system to our institutions, we're going to do better at retaining them. Buckingham and Kaufman, how many of you have read this book before, right? Excellent, excellent book. Based on a lot of good research. Highly recommend you look at that. They found that the manager, not pay, not benefits, perks, or the charismatic CIO or corporate leader, was a critical factor in building a desirable workplace and in fact, retaining people. They came up with 12 questions. The top 6 are the ones that probably were the most powerful. They had the highest cronbacks in terms of affiliating job satisfaction with these outcomes. I routinely ask my staff these questions. This becomes a litmus test to, are my managers engaged, and what is the job satisfaction level of people. If you see an individual respond to some of these things that are kind of low, they're candidates for turnover. And Buckingham and Kaufman's research kind of lead us to that. So the key thing here is making sure the key relationship from a retention standpoint is not the CIO, it's probably not even a director level, it's right down to frontline managers, and that'll mean different things depending on the organization and size of your institution. So developing the skill sets with IT managers so that they can have those interpersonal and leadership skills to deal with these things in a positive way is probably your single best investment that you can make. And making sure that these managers operate in such a way that they are perceived to be competent, fair, and trustworthy. If this relationship breaks down, you'll see a lot of turnover underneath people. And look, we've all worked for that individual in our careers, right, who was not the best manager, right? And you can remember how that made you feel and how frustrated we would get. So extrapolating on your own experiences and using the research data, we can kind of empathize and understand from a first-hand experience of why that's important. So you're looking at fulfilling these expectations, and Kay and Jordan Evans did a lot of research in this, and it's all documented in the other slides at the online that you can go back and read on some of these things. So managers, what should managers be doing then? Promoting IT skills specific to the current organization. Training programs, hiring talent for fit, we've talked about that, setting clear expectations, again, in job roles, focusing on staff strengths, not weaknesses. So many times we spend a lot of time trying to get somebody from here to here, and it's just a weakness, right? We spend time on people's weaknesses. Buckingham and Kaufman would also tell you that that's a waste of time, right? So we focus on leveraging the best skills that we've got and then maybe through some arrangement, working on bringing up new skills in task replacement. But they say spend the most time with your best people. That's one of the rules that gets broken. And finding the right career move. Some of us are in small organizations and there aren't a lot of paths up. But working with people, developing them to let them know that they're not going to be an IT tech installer the rest of their career is important. So if we can find pathways within our organizations, either in tech or tangential to tech, we're going to provide much more retention in our organizations. And I'd much rather have a staff member of my staff go and work, in another area of the university instead of directly for us than leave the university completely and go to work somewhere else. Recognition, this is an area that I've spent a considerable amount of time on. Basically, I can say this, that recognition programs can moderate turnover, so the best thing that you can do here is to simply say thank you, but do it in a very sincere and timely way. The most appreciated single form of recognition that people have is that sincere handwritten note from you, their manager or their CIO, their director, that says, hey, Steve, I noticed you did a great thing the other day, in supporting this particular problem. Appreciate the extra help. This means so much to me and the institution. Thank you very much, right? And you deliver that within a day or two of that event, not 6 weeks later, and it's not an email, it's a handwritten note. That has a tremendous impact on people's appreciation for not just the organization that they serve, but the institution and the colleagues that they work with, okay? One of the things that we have to be careful about is pulling people up into recognition scenarios. How many of us have, wanted to bring up and recognize that person, and we say, Alto, stand up, we want to recognize you and thank you for all the great work you did. But that's the last thing that he wants to do because, right, he doesn't identify. He's scared. That intimidates him. He's not comfortable in that environment. So the other thing that we can probably do is ask people how they want to be recognized ahead of time. So when I have new people coming in the organization, it's part of a questionnaire they fill out. How would you like to be recognized? What's the most meaningful thing? Money is not on the list, right? There's some other research out there. You can kind of get to that. But there's lots of things that we do, and we'll hear from others here in a second about what kinds of things you may be doing. Technical staff are often hired for their technical skills, but the research indicates that their job satisfaction for both them and their manager are interlined with interpersonal skills. So providing interpersonal skills training for both your managers and your staff can be very important. We use and teach a people map system. It's a very simple system developed by Michael Lillibridge, who used to be a clinical psychologist for the University of South Florida. And it's very simple, but it teaches people how to interact, right? To put aside the jargon, to walk a mile in their moccasins during the day, and really have a good, strong interpersonal communication skills. This translates not only among IT staff, but we also put some of the offices that we serve through it when they're willing and able. So now we're having very productive conversations, right? And I know that so-and-so, Steve's coming from this particular point of view on this thing, and that's just him. That's his frame. That's how he's coming at things. And let me work with that so that we have very effective and dynamic types of relationships that actually work instead of end up being confrontational. So training in those things can really improve job satisfaction, and we've measured retention through it. Training is essential. Job satisfaction, I remember when the task modification conditions exist. If you ask somebody to go out and learn Linux as opposed to Windows, or you've got them, make sure you provide them with the adequate training and follow-up in order to do that. There's nothing more frustrating, and we've all been in our careers, when we've been asked to take on some role or responsibility and we had no idea what to and how to do this, and we had to learn it through the seat of our pants. If we can deal with that, our job satisfaction goes up. And again, the last principle, have a recruitment and retention plan. Just have a plan, any plan. But put together some of these principles and the things maybe that you've seen here today and take that back. Will it work? No. But at least you've got some ideas of some things that you're going to try. Surveying your staff, figuring out where people are happy, what their job satisfaction level is, how they like to be recognized, writing yourself a recognition plan, committing yourself to writing those thank you notes, which does take time and effort, but put a plan in place. I like Dwight Eisenhower's comment here. In preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. Same thing's true in job satisfaction and staff recruitment and retaining. So 7 retention and planning activities that I can put up here is identifying who are your most valuable resources. I have a colleague at Georgia State University. They have so much turnover in Atlanta right now, it's very difficult. So he's got an A list of staff members that he cannot afford to lose. And according to Buckingham and Kaufman, he spends the most amount of time with them. Litmus test, how's it going, what can I do for you, so on and so forth, to try and identify their job satisfaction, right? We've all got those A players. It may be a DBA, maybe a network specialist. It's somebody on our staff that if they left, catastrophe might happen. Identify who those are and work with them closely. Make sure they've got the training and all those kinds of things they need at any level of the organization, right? At any level. Identify current perceptions of staff. We talked about surveying, maybe doing an entry level when somebody's coming into the organization, surveying them at that time. Develop awareness, skills, and practices top down. If your CIO or your top person doesn't own some of these principles, it might be okay. You might be able to get by for a while, but it's going to work best if you can build this right down through the organization. If a manager is educated in some principles and you're working with them on, doing some things, but their manager doesn't buy into it or the CIO is not buying into it, there could be difficulty. So try to work top down in your organization if you can. We have to be attentive to compensation, work with your HR department, and again, from the employee's perspective, it just needs to be competitive and fair. It doesn't need to be the thing, and many pieces of research will tell us it's not the thing, but it is a thing, and it's an important thing. We'll talk some more about that and your perceptions here in a second. Interpersonal awareness, we do the people map, invest in technical training to limit job modifications, and engage in meaningful recognition. Good summary of what the research says. So there's our 4 principles that we just talked about, and now I kind of want to move into some discussions and hear from you. We've got a little bit of time left. Somebody will have to bring me in, but what are some of your thoughts, questions, or ideas? Yes, sir.
Compensation and competitive and fair. How do you work with HR? I mean, because we try, that's one of the biggest problems that we have. They see an analyst in another area other than IT, and they think that, the salary should be the same.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of discrepancies there. How do you work with HR? And what documentation or what research do you take to them and fight that?
Well, I think there's some research here that you can grab onto, and there's a long list of references. So grab onto some of that. 2 quick things, and then I want to hear from other people's ideas. When it comes to compensation, it's all about local market. Okay, so Statesboro, Georgia is going to be different than Atlanta, right? So we have to get local, we have to talk reality, and we have to talk about our recruitment areas that we're pulling from. The other thing is doing things like broadbanded job descriptions can sometimes help. If you can talk to your HR, if you're not doing broadbanded, widely defined job descriptions with pay scales within that, if you're not doing that, take a look at broadbanding. Your HR officer should probably know about that. But we went through that conversation. I didn't get to all the broadbanding I wanted, but it got better. We went from like 30 job descriptions down to about 5, which I thought was pretty good. And they're very generic, and we'll place things. As CIO, I've just budgeted, and I've had to override some of those minimum salary requirements that HR wants through signature, right? It's my budget, so I have some authorization over that. And every person I've hired in the last 6 years, I've had to override that. But what are some of the other things, compensation-wise, that folks in the crowd would offer us? Yes, sir. Well, here's a couple of ideas. I mean, having a plan helps, because if you can go with your HR people and say, look, here's my complete recruitment and retention plan, and can you help me with this?
I can't go with that. I have to go through the process.
Well, work your way up. Manage up, as it were, right? Start collecting data on the local market. Make sure that's good data. Start your own spreadsheet. Call around to some of the businesses. Talk to their HR officers. Many of them will be happy to tell you, the information you need to know. What other suggestions do we have along this line? Yes, sir.
I found it useful, use that last second.
For the benefit of the tape, I'll just quickly summarize and say aligning job descriptions and titles, getting all that lined up, using Coupa data, along with local market data perhaps, to figure out, how are we, and then communicating that, both in setting expectations and making modifications. Very successful. Good. What else do we have? What other ideas? Yes, sir.
I run into the challenge where in our organization, it's kind of like an understanding that all across the board is below what needs to be. And so when I go to HR, they don't have the control. So kind of like, what do you do when HR basically said, well, we don't have the control?
Well, I think, making them your partner, right, and commiserating like we're all doing here a little bit about the subject, and just engaging in that dialogue. Things aren't going to happen after one conversation, but you keep going back, bring some more data, work together to collect some data. Maybe you can move the needle a little bit, start moving that conversation up. There's no, it's difficult, as everybody has said, and getting people to listen to us means that we need to exercise our own interpersonal skills of conversation negotiation and bringing real data. I mean, it's one thing to walk into your HR office and say, I can't hire anybody, right? We can't even get a good pool. But, coming back in with some real numbers and not being, perhaps anecdotal about it can help us center around something like that. I think we're all in that same category to some degree. Yes, ma'am. Right. So that speaks to the importance of the manager in the middle, right? And kind of working there, but creating that culture of recognition, right? That culture of celebration. And again, recruiting the right people with the right fit, with that disposition, the fact that we're in higher ed for a reason, most of us, and that's why we persist. So you're on the right track. I mean, that's important. And then communicating that down consistently and with fairness to people. Excellent suggestion. Yes. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, great. So, here we saw that kind of manifested as the manager playing to the strengths and not the weaknesses. So you bring a strength of marketing, how can we use that in an organization? How can we play that up? Excellent. That's excellent, Ruth. Thank you so much. I'll be right back. Go ahead.
One of the things that worked for us in the communication part, because we were lacking that as well, we started doing monthly meetings with all the staff and making sure that they understand that everything that they do also contributes to student success, because sometimes they don't see it. So we try to have them present on projects they're working on, so they can see the teamwork, and because a project is not successful without the other teams around applications, network, desktops, client services, etc. So I think that's kind of working on in the communication. And then the CIO goes out and does a overall speech and say, okay, all these projects are attached, and we show pictures of our graduation, etc. So we're more involved with the staff. So I think that's working.
Developing the interpersonal skills of staff in that context also helps communication, right? Because we get together, we learn these things together, and we learn how to communicate together more effectively. That's right. A lot of us were not hired for our interpersonal skills. Yeah. Right on, and that's a great skill. Let me go in the back. There was a question. Yes, ma'am.
What I was going to say is that what's helped us is to have more student assistants in the office. It helps the staff connect more with the mission. They get to see them sort of grow up in our office.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal when the students graduate or when they do something
Right on.
really good.
Yeah.
The staff is now not just sees themselves as information technology people, but as educators. So
Right.
that's not when you do living. We say we're educators, and then we run the IT department.
Yeah.
But students really help to get everybody excited about it.
Beautiful. Let me summarize that for the recording. That was involving students in your hiring and in your work, and how that connects staff members with the mission, and that we're really educators at all levels, both in and out of the classroom in that context. That's a wonderful thought and a beautiful one, too. There was a question next to you. Yes, ma'am.
On the recruitment side, I'm wondering if anybody has any suggestions, the recruitment is connected to retention. Is there any checklist? Because hiring skilled and motivated and with right staff is
Right. So the question's about recruitment. Are there any practices or skills? While you're thinking about that, I'll say, I have this mantra, and it's hire the person, not the resume. Because I can teach people the hard skills. I can teach them how to do, Microsoft, or I can teach them how to be more proficient in Unix. I can't teach them to be better communicators as easily. I can't teach them to fit in or adopt my values more easily. So that's kind of where we start. What do other people do in terms of recruitment? Any strategies or secrets? Yes, sir. Well, there's some. There's some consensus. It's difficult to hire students and get them to do what they're supposed to do. Yeah.
But only about 8 of them might show up.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but I make sure that the job feels reflected.
We've got just a few more minutes, I think. Yes, sir. Good. It's the hardest thing we do, really, is to hire people, right? So to summarize, I guess, making sure your job descriptions don't reference overhead projectors and things like that. Getting that alignment that we talked about over here, key, I think, in getting the right recruitment process started. And then when we're recruiting people through the hiring process, making sure that they get to meet the staff, we've got a real good feel for how their fit is, and involving staff in the ownership of that. Excellent, excellent. What other questions, comments do we have? Let me come up here and then we'll go back here. Go ahead.
We do the same thing. It's very fun and it's very good.
You get to, and when you can break down people's, tenseness, and you can kind of get to their essence, right? Make it fun. Having somebody teach you how to make sushi would be a fantastic way. That's the best thing I've heard in a long time. I may have to do some of that. That's good. Well, we could probably go on for another hour, with all sorts of war stories and whatnot. I hope you get something out of this. Again, there's some more out here online. I encourage you to download the thing. There's some self-reflection questions that I've put out here too that we pulled out of the research and from various sources. So, spending some time sitting down as you're making your plan and answering these questions are really probably good. Again, it's all on their outline, or I'd be more than happy to have an extended conversation with anybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for hanging in there right to the end. We'll go see the keynote, and thank you very much.